Morning, everybody joining now. We're just allowing a few minutes for people to get in, and then we'll kick off.
Yeah, it's not the usual bun fight for the biscuits, is it? Usually, when these things are done live. But yeah, welcome everybody. Anniversary of lockdown today. Yeah, I can't believe it's been a year. Can you, Tracey?
I know that has gone by. It's sort of terrifyingly fast in some ways, but actually, it seems surreal to imagine what it used to be like. You know, that in some ways.
No, yeah, you know, this will be a point in history that we'll look back on and be speaking about for years, really. Yeah.
What, this webinar, definitely.
Oh, definitely the webinar, yes.
For all the wrong reasons. We'll just give it, I think, let's give it another minute, Sean, and then we'll get things underway, because I know you've got lots to say, and I'm sure everybody's keen to start hearing some answers. Just as people are coming in, to let you know, please do submit your questions using the chat facility, and I will do my best to pick up on as many of those as possible. When we do get started in the next minute, I'll be asking Sean a nice leading question that he'll take a little while to answer anyway, so that gives you time to sort of formulate any questions that you have and get them typed up. Right, we seem to be at a fairly static number of participants now, so I think now is as good a time as any. So good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining this UKAA webinar this morning on RoPA, which is it's going to prove to be a pretty interesting topic. Lots of dimensions to it that Sean will do his best to explore. Let me introduce Sean to you first. So Sean is Head of Redress at the Property Redress Scheme, and he deals with complaints against agents in that role. And so that gives him quite a unique insight into the types of issues that may have led to the drive for RoPA in the first place. Sean, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and thank you for doing such a great job in publicising today's event. Really fantastic turnout. Please just tell us, what is RoPA? What's it all about?
Well, RoPA, we have acronyms all over the place, but it stands for Regulation of Property Agents, as simple as that. What's it all about? Well, there's quite a long history on that, and you know, the industry for a long time, and when I talk about the industry, I'm talking about the entire property industry, the buying and selling, the lettings, all the different elements, property management, residential property management. For years, there's been calls by people in the industry for the industry to professionalize, to be formally regulated, and to basically elevate the industry to a safe and compliant sector of the market. It's a huge sector of the market. We've seen that in lockdown and the way that the property market has driven the economy, whilst large parts of it are suffering. But it is been described as the Wild West, as a license for rogues to print money, etc., and also not of the standard that a consumer, if we'd like to call buyers and tenants and sellers and landlords, the consumer seems to be at a disadvantage in the market because of lack of regulation and rules and compliance.
Okay, and so the whole drive is to create some sort of regulatory environment. What's happening with RoPA? Because there was quite a lot of news about it, and it seems to have gone quiet.
So what is happening? So look, you know, ideally we'd be sitting here with a PowerPoint presentation, going through step by step all the things.
Not ideal for anyone ever.
boring you senseless with all the things that you have to comply with. But unfortunately, where we are at the moment, so what happened was, as I say, the calls for regulation have been going on for years, and eventually the government agreed to appoint Lord Best, who is a peer in cross-bencher peer in the House of Lords. He spent a long time been interested in the property sector and these precise things, and he convened together a group, the working group, to put together a blueprint for how regulation would look like, what regulation would look like if it was implemented. And the RoPA report was written and with contributions from all sectors of the industry. The actual working group was relatively small, but it reached out really widely. I remember at the beginning there was a kind of a bit of a hoo-ha, because it's like anything else with these working groups. If you're not on it, then it's, well, you know, you're suspicious of it. If you are on it, what you don't want is to be going to a group where there's 150 people and nothing ever gets done because you know, there's too many people there. It's a bit like the Chinese Parliament with 1,500 people trying to get their views across there. So to be fair, I wasn't actually on the working group, but I did contribute to a number of sessions, written and oral, to help formulate what was going on there. So anyway, the report was due to come out at the end of 2019, and something happened in 2019, didn't it? General election. So the general election, it was all put on hold, of course, because you know, a pending change in government, you know, a report coming out, you know, you didn't know who was going to be the government afterwards. So it was postponed until the actual issuing of it was postponed until after the general election. Although, to be fair, people already knew a lot of what was in it beforehand. And then it was in February they did the formal launch, and the report. So we all traipsed down to the House of Lords. We had a warm glass of, no, I think it was tea. There wasn't even a warm glass of wine, tea and a few sandwiches, and the report was launched. And the government said the next stage was it was going to be evaluated by the ministry and the minister, and that would lead in the future to some form of legislation coming out. And then the 23rd of March, lockdown. And what's happened since? Well, on the surface of it, not a lot. So from the government's point of view, everything's been put on hold, and because of COVID, and we are waiting now for the civil service to come back with what they think is going to be into the bill, and the bill will then be at some stage in the future will be put before Parliament. Now, saying that, and we'll come on to this in a bit because I want to keep this a bit brief. Saying that, there has been an awful lot that's been going on in the background. We haven't stood still. It hasn't disappeared. And although the government hasn't actually formally put forward any proposals, it doesn't mean that things are not happening. So we can discuss a little bit about that as we go along.
Okay, that's really useful, because I think you know, certainly from my perspective, I remember hearing lots and lots about RoPA, and particularly probably those working group stages, and then you know, it has crossed my mind, is this actually something that the government still wants to do, and is it going to happen? So it's useful to know that behind the scenes the wheels are still turning. Bit of a technical question for you, Sean, but we've had one in the chat, so thank you, Labib Azir. What are the differences between the TPO and the Property Redress Service? And I think when you answer that, Sean, it'd also be useful maybe just to outline perhaps the difference between redress and regulation.
Yes, well, very simply, redress or redress, not redress, as somebody once called up and said, I want to know about the redress scheme. It is basically, it is an escalated complaint service. So effectively, we step in when two parties that have a dispute or a complaint cannot resolve their differences themselves, and we intervene in to bring that situation to a resolution. So redress is about restoring people back to a position that they were before, for acknowledging maybe there's some wrongdoing has happened, and in not a lot, but not all of cases, evaluating what compensation or remedy is needed to be put in place to achieve that. So differences between TPO and the property redress scheme. Effectively, it's three things. One is a bit of history. So the TPO has been going for a lot longer than the property redress scheme. It formed as a voluntary organisation, is it 20 years ago, to try and get into the arena of dealing with people that wanted to voluntarily join a scheme that would resolve their issues. It got powers in 2009 when the Estate Agency Act came into place, and estate agents were mandated to be part of a redress scheme. It's a very good organisation. It's a competitor to us, but it's a good organisation. So where did we fit into it? Well, basically in 2014 we started, because all those years after estate agents, they decided the letting agents and property managers needed a redress scheme. So they introduced legislation making that mandatory for property agents from those sectors to join a redress scheme. And we applied for a licence and were granted it. My company, Hamilton Fraser, that basically runs us, although we're we're kind of independent within that. We ran a scheme for deposits, My Deposits. We were one of the three deposit schemes there, and we had a lot of experience in in these sort of areas of resolution and dispute resolution. So we came in. The idea was that at the time there were two existing organisations. We won't talk about the third because it's now withdrawn, but the two organisations there had pretty much got stable memberships, and the government was concerned about what they estimated was about a third of agents that actually didn't voluntarily join a redress scheme, and they felt that if they brought a third scheme in, it would give greater opportunity and choice into people joining those. So the difference is a bit historical, but we are exactly the same. We're governed by exactly the same regulation that is in place for law. So therefore we can, we have similar powers. Other differences is probably a bit in the demographics. So because TPO were more have been established a lot longer, a lot of the bigger companies had already joined TPO, and therefore when we first started out, we attracted a lot of the new start and the smaller agents who were either not hadn't joined TPO because they didn't need to, or were starting up and were looking for an alternative to joining TPO with their code and everything else there. So bringing on to that, there, such subtle differences there is that when we came in, the TPO was already established and had a code. There were a number of other codes there. So we took the decision that the law said that the obligation was to join a scheme, so that was kind of like a had to. So we would put fewer barriers into people joining, and then once they were in there, then that's how you can regulate and comply with them. And so we didn't have a code. We still don't have a code, and we'll come on to code a bit later on as part of the regulation. Other differences is well, we now have, as I say, we now have some of the bigger guys, because the third wheel in the equation withdrew from the scene, and we picked up 80-90% of their members. For whatever reason, they joined us, and that includes some of the bigger guys as well. So we are not a club, we are not a regulator. We are there to ensure that you comply by the law and provide the service to the consumers and access to the consumers. And that is the difference. Complaint handling and regulation are different things. A regulator has powers to enforce, powers to discipline, to guide. We deal with complaints. Of course we do help and do guidance and stuff there, but our only sanction is if you do not comply with a decision made by a redress scheme. We can expel you from the scheme. We have an arrangement with the TPO that if that is the case, that we inform them and they put a bar on you, okay, and that's our sanction, and we hand over the information to enforcement authorities like trading standards, any trade body they're a member of, the government, everybody that will listen, but we can't do anything else after that. It's up to them, the enforcement agencies to do it. So I know that was a bit longer than I thought I was going to go on that, but in summary, not a lot of difference. But of course, have a look at the websites, compare prices, services, and experience. If you're looking at two different entities or two different companies, we are slightly different on that, but we follow the same template.
Great, that's really useful, thank you. There's a couple of questions in. So one of them is from Sweeta Kavari. Will the new code of practice affect fees? And I think I'm going to bundle this up because also there's a further question in the chat which is around recommendations for a build to rent letting department in terms of qualifications to encourage staff in terms of best practice. And I think there's a couple of big question marks out here at the moment, which is around how do we get our businesses ready for this, because we know it's coming. The details are still, correct me if I'm wrong, but a little bit fuzzy. We don't quite know what the requirements are going to be, and for those businesses that would like to be ahead of the game or at least ready, they'd like to have a better understanding of what the requirements are going to be. There's also the argument that really we should all be striving to get our businesses into the best possible shape anyway, and follow best practice as closely as possible.
Yeah.
And I think that, looking to Sweeta's question, it's also around the administrative burden, and I think that should lead us on to a discussion around the fact that so far the proposal is this applies to agents and not to landlords. And when you look at the wider PRS, I think less than half of properties are actually managed by agents. So, is this genuinely going to be an effective consumer protection measure, or is it yet another regulatory burden on business?
No, absolutely. And all those questions came up before RoPA was engaged and during. And it's quite interesting that, as I said earlier in my opening comments, that this has been something that the industry's been calling for a long, long time. But of course, when things start to get moving, of course, things might not look as rosy as everybody thinks, or at least as simple to implement on that. And I think that, it's worth kind of mentioning that regulation in this country is a bit of a culture change for people. Certainly, up until about 25 years ago, the model that was out in the UK, as one lawyer said to me, we're a compliant nation, we're not a regulated nation. So that means that people were obliged to follow the rule of law and follow any kind of legal requirements that they have to enter into a business. A regulatory environment, those people that know the American market, for example, the land of the free and the free market, but it's one of the most regulated countries in the world, not just at federal level, but every single state seems to have a different regulatory regime. So regulation per se, it's been relatively new in the UK market. So it's 20-25 years of industries that were maybe not traditionally regulated, like medicine and law, to other industries, and how regulation applies onto that. And of course, once you start going down a regulatory regime, all the questions about cost, bureaucracy, barriers to entry, all of these things come out. And of course, RoPA looked at all of those. But the reality is, and coming back to your question, because it's a very, very good question, why so restricted to property agents as defined in the law, and not to landlords or to any other entity that is related in the property industry and probably needs to be in part of that regime? And the answer to that is practicality. And the practicality is that if you widen your remit so wide, you end up with a dog's dinner, and you can't ever get anything that's going to work. It's going to be unsatisfactory for everybody. So Lord Best was very clear on that. We're going to be very strict on the remit that we actually keep in that. Now, saying that, I have, like yourselves, I've got a lot of reservations about the what ifs and why are these not included. And you know, one of the ones areas is that for me, I look at it from a consumer point of view, and it doesn't matter who owns the building, manages the building, or whatever. You should have the same rights as your next door neighbour. Or in the building next door. So why, if you look like a duck, you quack like a duck, and you're providing, you know, you come on a plate with orange sauce, as a great quote from somebody in Northern Ireland said to me. I laughed my head off at that one. Is why are you not the same? Why are you under a different regime? Is that not putting the market out of equilibrium? Is it not skewing it towards those people that don't have the inverted commas burdens of regulation and put you at a disadvantage? So those are the things there. So I think it's going to be evolutionary. I don't think that overnight you're going to expect your one or two property landlord to be put under the same regime as you know, as an agent who's got national branches all over there. But certainly on the build to rent, which is a different model, an innovative model, and it does look and act as a business that that provides services similar to an agent, why they can't be included. And that's the debate that's probably going on at the moment, and might be, you know, might be one that comes back in there. But if you bring that in there, where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line between I'm a small landlord and I am a built to rent corporate entity that needs to be regulated in a different way? That's going to be one of the big questions. I don't have the answers to that necessarily, but they are certainly, you know, where we are at the moment, why it is limited at the moment.
Yeah, so I can understand there's questions around practicalities here and trying to do something that is achievable as opposed to being perhaps more ambitious. And it's also something that will play out over time. And I know that the ministry have also said that they've already announced an intention to make landlords belong to a redress scheme, and ultimately follow that pathway to regulation, but they don't quite know what that will mean in practice. So we're starting to get some more questions in the Q&A, one from Eric Walker. So it seems there is little provision for dealing with rent to rent and subletting agents, in inverted commas, who often don't have client money protection as they are acting as landlords. Should we be pressing to review this?
Eric, how are you? I know Eric very well. He's a member of my advisory council, and we've known each other for a good many years. Absolutely, Eric. And I've been in discussion with the government and pointing out that across, you know, across the whole board, the rent to rent issue is not, you know, as on the radar as it should be. There are all sorts of you know, problems with that, and the models are very, very varied and frequently at the bottom level abused. So you know, you have one level, the regular, you know, the professional rent to rent model, which works very, very well. You know, it's a good model. It's a lower risk model to the property owner stroke head landlord. It works for the business because they can manage the properties themselves. But the reality is that this market is brilliant in one way because it's innovative, but it's bad in the other ways because it allows people to come in and see an opportunity to make money in a non-legitimate way, let I say that. And it also is predicated on the fact that people don't understand the market, and therefore a lot of people that enter into the rent-to-rent market really don't have a clue how to do it properly or legally, and understand all the little nuances, from the insurances to the holding of money, client money, how to deal with complaints, their obligations under you know, for health and safety, HMO license. I could go on. We could do a whole one on rent to rent separately. In fact, actually, you bring Eric on. I mean, Eric can you know, would be a perfect guest to explain to you to your members, you know, all the different challenges of rent to rent, but I'm definitely on his page that we need to actually get that on the radar, and either prepare for regulation of that sector or include it into the regulatory framework as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we're going to be, you know, honest about this, if it is all about consumer protection, then there's really no argument for not including that sooner rather than later.
Absolutely.
Michelle Millen has made a couple of comments in our Q&A. So Michelle, just so you know that the rest of the audience can't see those, so anything that you'd like for audience, you know, the wider cohort to be able to see, please post it in the chat. But your questions are great. So you've flagged up the fact that, you know, asking, will a let-only landlord be included under regulation or under the redress? So Sean, what's your take on that? So I presume if you're engaging with an agent, that part of the letting process itself would be covered if an agent is doing that.
Well, let's look at the reality of it. At the, you know, there are conservatively 2.5 million landlords out there. It could go up anything to 4 or 5 million plus, depending on how you define a landlord. Property is a very attractive investment vehicle. A lot of people see that now as their pensions. We know all of those circumstances, so we know that it's very fluid. People come in and out of the market, you know, very quickly, and they come into a market where they are not necessarily equipped to deal with it. So we know those are the underlying facts. So regulating of every single landlord in the country, well, let's have a look at what's out there. There's Scotland and there's Wales as an example. So we have Rent Smart Wales in Wales, which is basically a national register of landlords and properties with a certain amount of do you knows and tick these boxes questions of what you should or shouldn't do. Scotland's a little bit more advanced in terms of agent regulation, but they also have a national register. So other countries out there, parts of the union, have looked at these models. So, as I say, going back to the remit of saying, well, what is their most effective way of actually regulating, and why this is on agents? They're not, I don't think, immediately going to be looking to bringing all landlords into the regime from day one. So where does that leave leave the landlord? Well, at the moment, there is no national register. Okay, so the government apparently have said that that's not on the agenda at the moment. In the manifesto promise by the Conservative government when they went to election, they talked about increasing the provisions for redress in the property sector. Part of that was the new Homes Ombudsman, but you know, we were always told that some form of redress will be available to consumers, tenants of landlords who are just private individuals, self-managing landlords. That hasn't happened at the moment. It's something I really want to see happen, both from you know, from a best for the industry perspective, but also that's what we do, and I think we can provide a service there. So I'm not going to hide from that. But so landlord redress is something that I am pushing for, but it will be a different beast. Now here's the elephant in the room. Okay, once you have a regulatory regime for agents, a code of conduct, qualifications, enforcement, does that not suggest to the casual landlord that this isn't an area that they should be dabbling in, and really should they not be joining an agent, getting an agent to manage their property on their behalf? I'm not saying that we go down the route that you make a landlord mandatory to have an agent, but you make it so that why would they not do that out of self-interest? At the moment, you know, I'm speaking to people like the National Residential Landlords Association, who, you know, represent now close to 100,000. Well, they've hit 90,000, but 100,000 landlords. Hopefully, by the end of the year, they'll have on board. But that's still a fraction of the number of landlords from what we said. They said, well, actually, you know, we think the landlords can be trained and can be able to manage their portfolios in a very professional manner. without the use of an agent. And I do certainly agree that if you want to make this your primary business and you are prepared to do this in a professional manner and go through the same hoops voluntarily that we hope that the agents would have to go through, then good luck to you. You will probably be able to do that. But most people will not do that. And therefore, it is a no-brainer that they should actually use an agent. However, the last point I'll say on that is at the moment there's a lot of cynicism because landlords do not see value for money from agents because agents are not regulated and they don't follow a set of rules and they don't really know what they're doing. A lot of them do, but there's a big branch of them that don't. So therefore it becomes a paradoxical catch-22 where landlords don't want to use agents because they don't trust them and then don't think they're getting value for money, but when they actually self-manage, it puts the consumer at risk, and we have an unregulated and a dangerous industry not just at the bottom end of it, but it extends quite far up the food chain to people that are not what you would class as normally vulnerable, getting the raw end of the deal from bad agents, losing money and living in an unsafe property. So again, another kind of long answer to a short question, but that's my take on it at the moment.
Okay, and I will follow up on that shortly, Sean. I'll come back to it about enforcement. That's my hobby horse. But for the moment, just if we can shift to something a little more positive. So great question from Mark North from HML Group. He heads up learning and compliance within the HML Group, and he asks the question: how do you see the role of the in-house trainer evolving when regulation comes into force?
Well, to be fair, paramount, and I'll give an example of that from another hat on our company. We're also an FCA regulated insurance broker, and so therefore we've been through the whole kit and caboodle of compliance and regulatory requirements from that sector. And of course, when it first set up, there was a very much hands-on, very heavy kind of regulatory regime from the then FSA in terms of your compliance and your regulation, and we were filling in forms left, right, and centre, and following curriculums and everything else there. But as it evolved, it became more as that you built within your infrastructure a self-regulatory regime that allowed you to watch and self-regulate yourself. So yes, the investment in in-house training and in-house regulation is going to be very key to this. Now, saying that, you are going to have a common curriculum, and you are going to have a regulator, and you are going to have a set of codes and rules. So you can't make it up as you go along, even if what you think you are making up as you go along is better than what you actually got on the regime out there. So yes, very much about the in-house training, and the demonstration of how you are doing that will be part of, I think, an essential part of the regulations. But you won't be able to do DIY and it to be seen as equivalent. There is going to be a regime out there. There's going to be a set curriculum. There's going to be a number of boxes you are and hurdles you are going to have to jump over. That's my impression of it at the moment. Let's see what the practice is actually going to be.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, Sean. So if we go back to the whole kind of enforcement conundrum, shall we say, so there's quite a lot of rules and regulations out there already. And I suppose arguably, I would say that the landlords and the agents who are the audience today are not the problem here, really, by and large. And neither are the NRLA membership, most likely. I think it's probably going to be those landlords who don't bother to join up any kind of professional organisation, don't use an agent, are quite ignorant of their obligations, and also there are a cohort of agents, as we know, the kind of the less attractive side of the private rented sector, who seem to operate almost entirely outside the rules, and they seem to get away with it time and time again, or they get a slap on the wrist. What would you say about that, Sean?
Again, so much we can say about that. I think, you know, it does all depend on what regime we put in. Okay, and in my view, I've always felt that good regulation looks like this. Its first primary pillar is to ensure that people comply. So you know, there has to be a real teeth to actually get people to comply. The second part of it is to modify behaviour. So, you know, once you have a regulatory regime, you want people to start doing the best things, the right things, and that will mean changes. And as you said, no, you know, most of the people sitting around, you know, in the room here, the virtual room, sorry, you know, feel that they're doing all the right things, but you know, you might not be, you know, necessarily, because, you know, custom and practice may mean that, you know, things have been going on and been taken for granted on that you actually don't know. And we saw that in the financial services industry and other things then when they got regulated. These are well-established companies. These weren't kind of fly-by-night companies, but they were doing bad practices that they didn't even realize they were doing. So that's the second part of it. And the third part of it is embracing it and actually realizing it's a differential, that is something different. And if we start at that last one there, because this isn't all kind of like a linear process, it goes, it's constantly going on. Is that if you get to that stage there, is that why would you not want to, if you are in, you know, to say to your consumers that we are good, that we provide proper, regulated, safe practices. Oh, we are not the cheapest, but you are getting those protections. If you want to go and use somebody that's you know, that has opted out of this and is charging you next to nothing, you are going to regret this. Is going to cost you in a long time. So that's the one pressure on that. But coming back to that very first pillar, it does, you know, if nobody's going to enforce this, if nobody's going to, there's going to be no consequences of it, it's going to be a meaningless law. And we're seeing that, you know, in the COVID regulations and stuff like that. You know, how far do you go down to fining people for drinking coffee on a bench in the park? Or actually, people can basically get away with everything that they want, and it's completely meaningless. So regulation means enforcement as well, and we know the challenges of enforcement. At the present moment, it's patchy, it's relying on local authorities, trading standards, other people there that are under-resourced, not prioritised, maybe not even knowing what they do. So part of, I think, of this is to actually with a regulator is to actually get meaningful enforcement, and that will mean resourcing it. Who pays for that resourcing? That's another debate. Okay, does it get paid for by the perpetrators through fines and penalties? Does it get paid for by the industry by fees and and licenses? Does it get paid for by the public state from the taxpayer? These are going to be debates that are always going to happen on this. What's happened so far is we now at least have a lead enforcement agency in the shape of National Trading Standards, the state agency, and lettings teams. Up until that was introduced, there was the estate agency, National Trading Standards body, but it didn't seem to kind of go across into lettings and property management. So at least we have that. They're a great team. I know them personally. A lot of you have probably met people like James Munro and other people involved in this. They're tiny, you know. The estate agents team is based in Powys in central Wales, in a joint venture with the local authority there, and the estate agents team now is based in Bristol, again with an association on that. They have a tiny team. That tiny team relies then on, can't do all the enforcement that we need. It relies on the local national trading standard, on the local trading standard groups and the environmental health officers and the housing teams. We know across the country, some places that works really well. Okay, in other places it doesn't. We know that the current local government structure is under pressure, both from COVID and was under pressure before. They don't have a lot of resources. We know that there is no coherent model across the whole of the country. Some places are unitary and therefore trading standards can work hand in hand with environmental health and housing. In other places, it's a function of district councils or county councils. So all of these challenges are both structurally and economically against effective enforcement going forward. So what will be the solution on that? I don't have the answer to that, but what we do need to do is address that, because otherwise this will be a complete waste of time. And I think really, you know, the proof of the pudding will be in the prosecutions and the cleaning up the industry and stopping people from actually entering into this industry in the first place. So, you know, prohibition orders and other stuff there need to be bolstered up. So I'm sorry that didn't answer the question, but it actually shows the challenges that we have on it. But it is getting, I have seen, you know, we've seen recently a lot of strategic and clever ways of actually trying to deal with this. And the regulations and the laws are helping this. So let's see where we go with that.
So Richard Berridge, hi Richard, has posted into the Q&A, perhaps if all tenancies had to be mandatorily registered and updated together with obligatory compliance data, we would be a step closer to monitoring the sector better, which I think is a valid point.
Well, Richard, I mean, I have to say, you know, one of the things I like about your sector, because it's so new, is that you are so receptive to new innovation and technology and other stuff there, and that innovation coming into the market is great, because, you know, at no stage in the past have we ever been in the privileged situation we have now in data sharing and able to coordinate information in the way that we can actually ongoing. You know, a few years ago, everything was form-based. Everything was you had to maybe deal with so many different agencies to get things out. Now with APIs and technology and blockchains and everything else, the world is becoming more interconnected technologically wise, in all areas except for probably one. Okay, and that is law and government. Government is slowly embracing it, but what we don't actually have is the way of agencies to effectively share data and to have it all brought together. And you know, I'm so welcome. You know, so welcome that the group headed by Kate Faulkner on the buying and selling group has actually, you know, made so much progress to getting a single information form that will go electronic and be able to share this data. I've spoken to the Conveyancing Association that you know, that's looking at how you can get the conveyancing processes there, and your industry where you can actually start to use technology for gathering information from anything from the state of you know, of your buildings through to your customer needs, repairs, and everything else there. You could get that into technology. So I'm not saying that, you know, that we're there yet. I think technology is going to be a huge part of it, but the will of you know, the industry is to make sure that that information is shared in the agencies. Regulation could help that because it can coordinate the vested parties in interest to work together to bring that information into a single source accessible by the consumer.
Good. I know there's been quite a lot of commentary around different prop tech propositions that hope to kind of harness that big data approach and make that regulation and enforcement piece a little easier. You know, looking at the UPRN, for example, and what that might open up in terms of just being able to correlate whether there's a buy-to-let mortgage and a gas safety cert, for example.
No, absolutely.
Richard's been provocative today. He's put another question in there saying Tracey might not like this, so I'm tempted not to read the rest of it out, but I will. Being a landlord, but if each registration carried a £10 fee, it would pay for all the resources required to enforce what we need to enforce. And actually, Richard, I totally agree. I think that I would much rather see one scheme in place rather than the kind of piecemeal landlord licensing that varies across different local authorities, which I remember from my Granger days was quite a significant admin burden, just trying to keep up with all those. You know, now I've got the luxury of working with a portfolio in one specific location, but it's for large operators, it's a significant problem.
No, absolutely. When, you know, because all those £10 add up. And one of the things I've written at the top of a piece of paper I've got there is money, money, money. Because at the end of the day, when when this is all said and done, and we've all had our wish list there, and then it comes down to what the actual cost is there. I will say one thing: there is a distinct difference between a register and licensing. Okay, licensing, register is just basically recording of that you exist and what the state of that property is as a snapshot, which is renewed on a regular basis. Licensing is about the way you behave and what you need to do. Okay, and whatever the dividing thoughts on local licensing. If it worked perfectly, not only would it be a register and a recording, but it would involve active help and support for people within the licensing regime. So we all know, when you read the regulations, that there's an obligation on the local authority to, if it sets up a licensing, to inspect every single property. It doesn't inspect any, as far as I can see, in some places. So if it's going to be done seriously, it's either going to have to be just, well, basically we want to know the data, we want to know you exist, so or it's going to need to be a bit more kind of like, well, what, it's a two-way street. We're here to help you to improve your businesses. These are the things you can do in there. Licensing requires you to do that, but that's going to take resources. So you're right, at the moment, it's a postcode lottery on HMO licensing, alternative licensing, everything else. And the alternative on there is a light touch Scottish type or Welsh type register. What's in between and how much will that cost? Now that may be £10, maybe £100. I don't know, how you would actually price that. And what you would have to actually say, well, actually, what can you deliver for those price points? And also, as soon as you introduce this, what's the risk of cost creep? So that, it may start off as £10, everyone signs up to it, and but in 4 or 5 years' time, it's escalated into an uncontrollable and money-making venture. So those are the other big questions that Richard is right to say there. But you all do your business models, and compliance now has to be part of your cost-based model. And you should be looking and say, well, actually, as a business, how much do we want to spend on regulation? Is that 5% of our turnover? Is it 10%? Is it less? How much do we value it, and how much do we need to invest in it? And if we can start feeding that information into the process of evolving this, you will get a realistic expectations of where industry values this as part of their business model. If it's all imposed on there, then it becomes a burden and it becomes something that people resent. So that's where I would be suggesting that we're looking at, saying that, what is a fair proportion of our turnover to invest in compliance and training and regulation as a business model. What makes a good business model, and where's the balance on that? So over to you guys in that way a little bit.
Yeah, fair point. Thank you, Sean. A couple more questions that have come in. So I'm going to link these two together. So Michelle Milliner has asked, is this going to cover property sales too? So I think that's just taking us back up to a higher level, so that kind of helicopter overview of RoPA. So if I can ask you to answer that, Sean, but at the same time, also Tracey Cook had just asked the enforcement question. So I think it's just to cover off the fact that we don't yet have an appointed regulator, but if I can hand that to you, please, Sean.
Okay, so we don't have an appointed regulator. We do have a lead enforcement agency, which is National Trading Standards, and it is basically we're in that compliance stage there. So whatever the powers of the local authority that they have under the law, be that a member of a redress scheme, be that HMO licensing, be that HHSRE. I got that right. We need to change that acronym. I know that. Be all of those at the moment. That's the regime at the moment. So from your compliance point of view, you've got to have your fingers in so many different legislative pies to know all about this. Bringing a regulator in, at least we'll bring that into a central part there. ongoing at the moment. You know, the argument will be about how much investment is in on that. I certainly think that there's a role for self-regulation as well. So I think very much that the bodies like UKAA and you know, are there. Yes, it will include sales. It will include sales. Sales are a major pillar of that, along with lettings and residential property management. We are at the moment, with as an industry, we're sitting down because this has all gone on hold at the moment, trying to bring together a universal code for the property industry. It's you know, been led by RICS and TPO and other organisations to try and bring a high level code into the market. From that will become sector specific codes. So you have the universal, what can we all sign up to, and what should we all be doing as property professionals, and underneath that will be the different sectors, buying, sales, lettings, property management. At the moment, not build to rent. It was brought up, why was this not the case there? So it might be something UKA wants to say, hold on, we want to sign into this universal code, we need our own separate code. So that's how it's working at the moment. Having a code is great, but of course a code is a bit like you know, setting things in stone. If it's not looked after, it becomes out of date very quickly, and it needs to be so what sort of resourcing and what mechanism will you need to actually change the code, and to have the code have the code with teeth, but also is able to be changed. So that debate is going on at the moment. So yes, a lot is going on in the background, and Tracey, you've been involved a little bit in all of this as well, haven't you?
Yes, so certainly in the original PRS code, which ironically was meant to begin life as a build to rent code, but that project got slightly hijacked within the ministry and became a kind of a much broader exercise. I see Andrew Bulmer's joined us now, and I'm sure he is still mentally scarred by that whole.
He's a world expert on it.
He's still in counselling, but yes, and certainly the UKAA has been involved with the RICS on the work on the block management sector specific code, which will sit underneath the overarching code, and we're playing the hokey cokey basically, because one meeting build to rent's in and the next meeting we all agree build to rent should go out, and whether it should sit within lettings rather than block management. But of course that's the issue with build to rent, is that it straddles both, and therefore I think it probably does need its own devoted code, which is where we were gosh, I was going to say 4 years ago, more than that now, back in 2014.
Yeah, I think cheekily, you know, as he can't speak, he's on mute. I think you should be inviting Andrew on to a webinar like this when the code has actually been released to go through it in painful detail, I'm afraid. So, sorry for volunteering you, Andrew, but I think you are a world expert in this, I think, now.
I'm conscious that we're edging towards the end of this session. Couple more comments in the Q&A. Richard Berridge is sort of extolling the potential benefits of going down that UPRN route, and I completely agree. And I think that's probably a whole webinar all of its own where we could look at this. But he's saying, you know, that £10 per registration would generate pretty hefty income for the Treasury very quickly, and he would make non-registration a criminal offence. And he hasn't actually said put people in stocks on the high street, but maybe that's an idea too. So thanks, Richard. And Mark North has raised the question around non-qualified agents. So I'll read it out. There are a huge amount of property agents operating across the sectors who are exceptional at what they do and are above reproach in how they deal with their clients and stakeholders. However, they are unqualified and work solely on experience. Do you fear we could lose real talent from the industry because some of these people may find exams a barrier? And what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, that's the famous grandparenting question, which is basically how much does experience count over qualifications? And I understand, and you know, that was quite a contentious part of the debate that the working group looked at on you know, you know, I've 30 years in the industry, I've got this, I've got that. Why do I need to? Can't I have an exemption? And I think the conclusion was, the recommendation of RoPA was that no, you have to have a level playing field for everybody. But you know, how much does experience and you know, other qualifications count towards this? And I think the key is that you know, as somebody who has also, you know, looked at education and training for many years. You know, there are other greater experts than me, but I've spoken to a lot of great experts. We don't all learn the same, so I think that there has to be an understanding of how to effectively deliver the qualifications and the training that mean that it actually is not just going to be a tick box exercise or you know, a certificate you put on the wall and forget about it. The how, you know, you are going to integrate in CPD, continuous professional development, you know, benchmarking, all these other things there to help improve the industry. And so you know, there will be people there that, you know, will get to a stage and say that enough's enough. And you know, this is, I'm not going to do that, I'll move on to that. But I don't think it would be, you know, I think there are ways of educating and training people that are not going to become this kind of barrier that, you know, that you are going to spend you know, 16 hours working in your day job and then another 7 hours studying in the evening, and maybe getting 2.5 hours sleep. You know, and having that dilemma between getting the qualifications and running your business in an effective way. I think that balance needs to be taken into consideration as well. So the answer to that is, my understanding is that was an ongoing dilemma that the working group had to deal with. They haven't necessarily got all the right answers on that, but I certainly think there's been a lot of discussion there. And I think I'm going to say one thing on this. If we allow the government to impose this on it, we ain't going to be happy with it. What industry has to do is to work together now to lead government, to provide a model that will actually work for the government. Okay, and then you can hand it over to the regulator and say, just like the code, here we've looked at, we've understood now the remit and this. What about this model? This has been tested in X, Y, or Z by, you know, by Property Mark, by IRPM, by ARMA, whoever is out there, that already these great organisations that have got qualifications that are doing it. Okay, and those are you know, those are the ways that we need to also prepare as an industry, not just as individual companies, but as an industry, to say, let's actually provide that blueprint to the government. Build on RoPA, build on work on the code, but actually next stage is build on the training to actually say to government, you don't need to kind of reinvent the wheel, here it is.
So we've got a real opportunity to influence and to ideally, you know, offer up a ready-made package, so to speak.
Yeah, interesting. I'm going to make a point on that. It's going to have to be, you know, even if we do it, you know, voluntarily, it cannot be something that everybody gets through in. You know, as Groucho Marx says, if I wouldn't be a member of a club that would have me as a member. Very interesting, and again, I'm good friends with Andrew Glenn, with Dr. Nigel Glenn of ARMA. He took the decision when he took over CEO there to basically, you know, get rid of 2/3 of his membership because they didn't meet the standards of qualification that they needed to do. So basically what he said, well, actually, you're no longer a full member at the moment. You've got to go through ARMA-Q, which is their training thing, before we let you in as a full member. So, you know, if there's going to have to be barriers to entry on this. that are going to mean that the people have to go and jump through hoops to do that. If they're not prepared to do that, they can't be part of the club. Not the club, but the regime. It has to be that way. What we don't want it to be is to become so constrained that it stifles innovation. It increases bureaucracy and cost, that it leads to barriers to entry, that you're not part of that club, so therefore you can't be operating, and therefore your legitimate business can't play with the big on the football pitch. Those are the three pillars that we need to look at. Bad regulation can hold back an industry. Good regulation can make it thrive, and that's the ambition that we have to actually have.
Okay, thank you. We're very nearly out of time, and I'm conscious people want to get away. Just a couple more things. Andrew Bulmer has actually posted into the Q&A, so I'll just quickly read this out because it's very much supporting what you've just said, Sean. The decision on grandfathering will be taken by the regulator, and experience may be taken into consideration. However, Lord Best was clear: when managing the safety of people's homes and the biggest financial asset class in the UK, some form of proportionate and reasonable qualification would not seem an unreasonable ask. And I think that there's probably none of us that would disagree with that. And just two very quick questions from Michelle again. So firstly, how long do you think it will be before all of this is finalised? So before RoPA's kind of in and running? And also, any idea as to what members of staff will need a qualification, finance, back admin staff, for example?
Right, so very quickly on timescales, I'm only going to give you what my view would be in an ideal world. Please the powers that that we are through. We will get through COVID and start to resume some form of normality by summer. The first opportunity I could see for the government to bring forward proposals for this would be in the autumn. It could well be not until spring. Okay, and then I think it's quite how long is a piece of string? In the legislative way legislation comes in, that there's usually anything from 6 months to 18 months of Parliament looking at and bringing in a law, and then usually what they do then is that they look at when an implementation date needs to be put into place, and there will be a period of time in which you start setting up the infrastructure of doing this, and and that could take anything up to two years or longer. So I'm thinking even with a fair wind behind this, and they start getting their act together either in autumn or spring next year, we are still looking at 3 years hence from now before it's all rolled in, and there might be a transition period. So off the top of my head, if we have it in by 2025, I would be, that would be good. If we were up and running by the end of the decade, fully compliant, then that's probably more realistic, to be honest. But it's going to take a while to do this, because this is not an overnight kind of tweak to it. It's a major overhaul of the industry. And in terms of actually preparations to doing that, well, that's the point. Don't wait for it now. Start looking at what you can do now. Speak to people like UKAA, there's the IRPRM, all these people there have got help and advice on how you could set up your own compliance and a regime now. And all of this is about that third pillar of what I said is, we haven't got to comply at the moment. We are masters of our own destiny and changing our own behaviour, but we can certainly start to look at increased reputation and demonstrating to the consumer there that we as businesses have got the right parts of the pillars in. And it's a differential to those people that don't want to do that and are going to either put their head in the sand and wait for this all to be imposed on them, or have no intention of ever complying with that in the first place. So there are my tips at the moment on it.
Okay, and we're anticipating potentially a lower level of qualification required for say back office staff versus frontline.
Level three qualifications are kind of recommended for the as the base level, which is about A-level standard, and it will. The higher qualifications and more training will vary from sector to sector. So one of the things that came up was whether your receptionist needed the same qualification as as your property manager, and of course that's not the case, but everybody in your organization represents your organization, every person will have some either actual or virtual contact with your customers and will be part of that process. So having a level 3, which is A level, AS, A level standard qualification will be the base level. But a base is a basis. It's not a target, it's its starting point.
Yeah, good point. Fantastic. Sean, thank you so much for taking so many questions and giving us such a sort of a romp through the whole topic. I think the key takeaways are that it's watch this space. There's still an awful lot of detail to emerge over time, but that is not an excuse not to start getting your business ready now and getting yourself into the best shape you can be in.
Absolutely, Tracey. It's been a pleasure. Everybody just enjoy the rest of the day now and get on with the day job. And I'm more than happy to come back and give an update on this when we know a little bit more. Thank you so much indeed.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone.